I think we're gonna do this. I don't know. Woo! Hey. All right. Wonderful and illustrious sponsors. Thank you for the pizza. These are them. So everybody, give a round of applause. Oh, nice. Yeah. So today we have Andrew talking with us about Hapi.js. Next week we've got Strat Parrott coming in to give a design-related talk. So details will be coming out about that tomorrow. Watch your inboxes. So we're running a little bit behind, so I won't waste any more time. Everybody give it up for Andrew.
Is this mic on? Can you hear me? Is this right? Okay. Say what? Speak up? Or is it okay? Okay. Cool. This is my first time presenting in quite a while. It's the first time here, so thank you guys for coming out in spite of the weather. Yeah, we're going to talk about Hapi, and we still got our screen there. So there we go. All right, so today we're going to talk about HapiJS, and anybody currently using Hapi? Anybody heard of Hapi? Cool. Anybody doing node development?
It won't start yet.
Thanks, Andrew. You're the best. All right, so that sounds better. All right, so a few people doing Node. So this is a web framework that is built on top of Node. And a little bit about me. I'm Andrew. I've been around the developer community here for a while. You may have seen me. I used to run a meetup called noogaJS. It was all about JavaScript. I work for WeCounsel, which is, we do telemedicine counseling service, so video conferencing, and that's mostly Ruby on Rails with some JavaScript. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm pretty much Androonix everywhere on Twitter. The Androonix that's there is not me, so if you put the @ sign in front of the N, it looks like Androonix, and I thought that was kind of cool anyway. So, so Hapi, it's a web framework. It's built on Node.js, and that looks kind of small. I hope you can read. It's similar to, anybody use Express or familiar with Express? Okay, a lot more Express people. So it's similar to that. To me, it's a little smaller and a little better. It's a little easier for me to get my head around. Express seems a little big, and it's great. I'm not complaining about it, but there's Express, Sales, Koa, and it's similar to that. And it can be used for microservices or full applications, APIs, that sort of thing, whatever. It's pretty cool. It's a project of Walmart Labs, and Aaron Hammer's the guy who is the main developer and curator, I guess, of the project. And if you follow him on Twitter, he's a pretty interesting guy. Hope you're not easily offended if you follow him, because he's colorful. Brian Newton, I don't know Brian, but he shared, is he here by chance? Anyway, he shared this story on the Chattanooga Slack the other day about the history of the Express framework, and if you've read that, it's pretty interesting, the unbelievable history. But anyway, Express is great. It's been around a while, and it's written by TJ, how do you say it, Chris? Hollywood Chuck or whatever. But anyway, it got passed along. He's no longer involved with it. It got passed to somebody else, and IBM eventually bought it from Strong Loop. And so it's kind of crazy. So if you're sick of that and the big business developing and owning your open source framework, then you might want to think about Hapi. It is more community driven. I like it. I like it a lot. I'm not in love with Node, but I want to like it. I come from more of a C++ and Java background, so all programming languages should have curly braces and semicolons, and that's just the way God intended it. It's like any other Node package. It's really easy to install. Just npm install, and of course, it obviously is a prerequisite that you have Node and npm installed. So just jumping right in. Hello World, which is everybody's favorite application, right? So here's the whole Hello World web server in just a few lines of code. you start out and you just require Hapi as a module. You create a new Hapi server, tell it what port you want to connect on. There are a few more options you can pass to connection. Then you define a route and start the server. We'll talk more about that route, but the routes are very simple. You pass a method, which is your HTTP verb, the path that you want to listen on, and you give it a handler function that has a request and a reply object. And so, you can do all this in Node, yes, but you have to do a lot more. So Hapi's really wrapping up a lot of this stuff for you, making it easier and nicer. Like your request and your reply objects already have some things built in that you would have to include with if you were doing just pure Node or even Express. So in this example, the reply interface that we've got here automatically is going to, it sees what you're passing back, and it understands that that's HTML or text/HTML. So it's going to give you a return status code of 200 and the content type. So I just happen to have that up in an editor here. So if I just run node server here, oh, that's the wrong one. Node hello. So that's that code right there. If I open it in hello, ta-da, hello world, earth shattering, right? If you look at it in Postman, which is awesome. Sorry. What happened? Hey, Cal. We lost my screen. Yeah. Oh, you gotta wiggle it. Huh? Not Windows. I shouldn't have to reboot it. Hey, don't mess it up. Brett. This Apple hardware, God, it's great. Yeah, well. Meanwhile, I'll tell a joke. I heard it, Ron's not here, so yeah, I've got a good Bernie Sanders joke, but it's not funny unless you all get it, okay? I'll be here till 1 o'clock, okay? Let's see. I heard another joke that I can't share it in this room, though. It's pretty bad.
I don't know if it's that. I don't know what it is. It could be this wall jack.
All right. So we're back. There we go. All right. So where were we? So we just did Hello World. That made it smaller. I know it's not going to be as easy to read. So suffer. So anyway, what I was trying to say there is that you get an HTTP status code of 200, and if you look at your headers, I know you can read that, but it's text HTML. It automatically it detects what you're returning, and it sets the content type for you, just with that reply interface. So that reply function right there. So routes take a configuration object. So like I said, initially you have a method, path, and a handler, and there are a lot more options. So obviously you can pass any HTTP verb there, so get, pat, push, delete, whatever else. I don't know about head. And then the path, and then the handler function. So the handler can be inline there as anonymous or a named function expression like that with a request and reply. The route options, so so here you can see we can either pass a handler function directly, or you can give it a config block that's going to take an authorization scheme. It has a bind option so that you can bind an object to this in your handler function. Caching options and CORS options, there's more stuff there. The route parameters, I wanted to point out, if you're doing a RESTful service, like most of you probably are at this point, you want to pass like a resource and then a specific resource ID. It's in curly braces after the route. Different libraries do that differently. Sometimes you'll have a colon ID or whatever. So yeah, typically you do something here like in your handler function. This is one of the things I said, that with Hapi, it does some things for you automatically. It automatically parses your request parameters and puts them into a params array on the request object for you. Same thing with the payload. For if you're posting a form, you have a request.payload and request. Can't remember the other one, but it's for things that are on the actual URL. It's on here somewhere. You can do optional route parameters. I don't know if you can see that, but if you put a question mark at the end of the last parameter that's inside the braces, then it's optional. You can check whether or not it's there. It's not required. And you can do, if like this one, you can't see that either. Probably it's a name time with a star too. So you can have, it matches multiple segments. So like that would match /users /Donald/Trump. So you could have two name parameters. So that's the route options. Then, like I was talking about with the reply interface, if I want to pass a JSON object to it, it's automatically going to reply with that header type set to content JSON as opposed to HTML. You can reply with a static file, just the contents of a file with the reply with a file method. And you can do redirect. And there's some other things built in that I'm not covering. One thing that's kind of cool is they've moved it out of the core Joy stuff into a sub-package. It's called H202. And it allows you to proxy. So if you wanted to set up a front end for your site using Node and you wanted to proxy things over, it will pass that request over. And there's all these proxy options. So you can pass over parameters and cookies, or well, maybe not cookies, but things over to another site. So that's the way, like I heard of someone who was using this. They wanted to move all their stuff from their old PHP site to a Node-based site. So they put up the proxy and so just passed everything over, and then one by one they could peel off little functions that they wanted to implement in Node and then put them in Hapi, and so it would proxy everything else over the back end. So kind of cool. You can serve just a directory of files, like if you had some just static files that you wanted to be able to serve. It's a submodule called inert, and of course you have to npm install that one separately. They had everything bundled up kind of as a big part of Joy, and they started moving things out of it to make Joy smaller, and then you only pull in the features that you want. So, but they're all on the main Joy GitHub, which yes. So you can see all the sub-projects that are listed here. Won't go into those. I did want to point out, I got into, before I got started, I got distracted. There's quite a few people using Hapi at this point. I mean, some pretty big names. Obviously, let's see, Disney, Walmart's going to be on that list, but one I thought was kind of interesting that you guys may know of is called OpenTable. They're on there. So they use a lot of different stuff. So I don't know if any of the Chattanooga people at OpenTable are using it. Thanks, babe. Thought I turned off my notifications. Okay. She's sweet. For error handling, so they've got another sub-project called Boom, and it handles 400, 500 errors, and it's really nicely done in the way they name the methods on the Boom object are like mapped to what the return code, the HTTP return code means. So if you look at Boom bad request, it's going to send a 400. Unauthorized is 401, not found is 404, and you can see the whole list of them here. And so there's a big long list of 400s and 500s, and it's pretty cool. It's to me, that's the good thing about the way this project's structured is everything seems really intuitive. It's like if I wanted to send a 404, how would I do that? Oh, well, it's the Boom not found. Duh. So it's pretty cool. And here's a short example. I'm not looking at the clock, so I have no idea. I know we had some technical difficulties. I'm sure y'all tell me when I'm close to done, right? 20? 28, okay. So anyways, here, it's just, here's an error handler in this function. So if I, for whatever reason, just don't like you and I want to tell you whatever you asked for is not found, you just do a new Boom not found, pass it a message, and it will reply with that. And it's going to give you again, sets your HTTP return code to a 404. Here's one that's a 400. This is what it actually returns. It returns a JSON, so it's not a pretty return. It's just JSON. So it's up to you as the client developer to handle that and present it nicely to the user. A lot of what you see, right, or I see with Hapi, it has to do with microservices or APIs, and so everybody's doing their React or Angular or flavor of the month JavaScript front-end framework. But you can do views from the server side as well. If you wanted to use Handlebars or Jade or Slim or one of those templating languages or engines, you can. There's another sub project that you need to install called Vision. It's Hapi's sub project for handling that. And then you just register the engine that you want to use in this views. I failed to mention that here we're calling it a register function. So on the server, if you want to load things into your server before it gets started, you do it here, and you can require modules here. So instead of requiring this at the top and then registering it here, you can just require it inline. And you can pass an array of plugins that you want to include and register at one time. So they all have a require and a register function. And then we're using some ES6 fat arrows syntax there. So we tell it, in this case, we're going to say you can use multiple templating engines. So we're using Handlebars and Jade in the application. And you give it a relative path and a path name where to look for your templates. Anybody use Handlebars or Jade or Slim or, yeah, you guys are familiar with that. So those are not uncommon. They're not exclusive to Node or Hapi. It's something you can use in other languages. So then here you would just have here's the hello HBS handlebar template, and you see in the double braces here, you have a parameter, first name, and then your view handler, where you're going to render this, you call the view function, you pass it the name of the template that you want to use, in this case, hello, maps to that. It looks it up in that path name we defined, and I pass it an object here with a attribute of first name, Andrew, and voila. I do have that one, run that one, just because I think that's pretty cool. Well, I actually don't need to do that because we don't have a lot of time. And then Joy is another sub-project. It used to be part of it, but now it's used for validation. It can be used outside of Hapi or outside of as well. It's not related. It's not tied to Hapi, but it's a project from there. And then the API for Joy is really pretty cool. So it's a series of chained methods that you use to validate. You give it a data type. Let's see, it's like a string here. So we can say it has a minimum value, a maximum. It can be a credit card, and it'll validate that it's a proper credit card type, number, email, et cetera, et cetera. So here's, I know these are hard to read. So your first name here, what you would do is you require Joy, and then you define a schema, and you say that for this object, I want to, here are the fields I want to validate, and here are the rules. So joy.string, and I can give it a max, and I can say it's required, joy.string.email for my email field, joy.string.creditcard for a credit card. And so then when you call it, you say validate, and you pass it in the object here, and in this case, this is going to be a valid one, so it calls our function. Well, either way, you pass it the object you wanted to validate, the schema you're validating against, and then there's a function that passes true or false, whether it's passes. So for an example, here's a route we defined with a view, and then we put this in the config block for this route. We say we want to validate, and here are the parameters. I'm pulling this out of my request params name, and I would say I want it to be a string, minimum of 3, maximum of 12. So validation, like I was saying earlier, you get built in your query parameters. That was the one I was trying to remember. So if you have, your URL has parameters on the URL, those are in there. The params that are part of a route that you define, or the payload, you can validate any of those built in with Joy. It's really nice. Server methods are where you can create kind of reusable code that you want to use throughout your application, so it's not built into a route handler or whatever. You want to put it in a server method, and they can be asynchronous or cacheable. Here's one example. So let's say we want to have this function that we want to make sure our email is unique. So the server method you define with server.method. So it's just saying this is going to be a reusable piece of code here, and it's called unique email. And then it takes a function as a parameter, and you define the parameters, but it ends with a next function. So it's a callback that you're going to call when you're done validating. So this is obviously a real world example of an email lookup because it's hard coded there for my email address. So basically what you say, if this is a valid, if it's not equal to andrunix@gmail.com, we just call next, and so yeah, it passed. Otherwise, it's this is a bad request, so we're going to boom, and that's not going to work, dude. So yeah, the point being, you call next on either way, whether it's pass or fail, and you can pass it a boom, or you can pass it the value that you wanted to bind to. And route prerequisites. So this is a place where you execute code before your route handler takes over, and you can pass any of the parameters from the request to these prerequisites. They can be synchronous or asynchronous, and parallel or serialized. There's a website, but so here's an example of a route prerequisite. So again, this is just a regular route with a method, path, and a handler. But what we're going to do here before, this is what this pre-block does. I can pass an array of methods that will get called before my handler is called. So I can pass them in sequentially, just as comma-separated list of objects. But if I pass an array in here, it will call these in parallel, whereas it calls these serially. So that's pretty cool. So if you have some things that need to happen all together, or don't need to happen serially, you can pass them in an array. It'll call those, and then once they're all completed, it will call your route handler. So in this case, yeah, we're doing it's going to call all of these methods before it calls my handler function. And at that point, at any point during any of those, we could do something that's going to cause like the unique email thing. You say, oh, well, that's a 404, or that's a unauthorized or whatever. So our handler actually never gets called. Authentication is obviously important for your application, and it's such a big topic. I don't have time to talk about it in any detail, but you have schemes and strategies. So a scheme is basically what type of authorization do we want to do. So basic authorization with user password, cookie-based, token-based, OAuth, whatever. And then a strategy is basically an implementation of that. So so you can configure your authentic. It's the microphone. He's messing up. You can configure that at a specific route level, so you can use different authentication schemes for different routes, or you can do them all in the same app, have a single authentication strategy. So here's a simple example of just a basic authentication. I've got a database here with a list of users at the top, and then so I want to tell my server, I'm going to register that I'm going to use this Hapi auth basic strategy, and then, or scheme, sorry, I always switch those around. And then the strategy is this, we're calling simple basic. And so it takes a validate function. Any strategy is going to take a validate function. And for a basic authentication, it takes a request, which is your HTTP request, a username and password, and then a callback function that you're going to call to say whether or not this is authorized. So what we would do here is we pull out of the database, the user that matches the username that we're passed. If it's not found, then we want to call our callback with an error here. So the false here is an error. And if it matched, or we found it and the password matches, we're going to call the callback with, we can pass an error, and then the is valid, true or false. And then optionally, you can pass back any kind of credentials or whatever that you wanted from your validation lookup. Then on your route, so this is just to register your strategy with your application for your server. And then here we're defining it on the route object itself. We have in the config block, we say for authorization, we want to use this simple strategy that's defined here. And again, you can have multiple strategies defined within the same application and use them on different routes. So like if you had admin pages or whatever, that blah, blah, blah. Plugins are, they're not really middleware. They're just, again, they're kind of a place to modularize your code and organize things. So if you have features or services in your application, you'll have the plugin will take a register function, so you register that plugin with the server. This is an example of how you might do, if you want to set up a configuration information in a JSON file for your application, you might put like a development.json or a production.json, and then you would register that, and here what we're doing, this register function takes a server, options, and next. So we're going to expose to our server. Then what this does is it requires the file name here, which is just like if it was an environment variable that said development, it would be development.json. And then we call the next function. So now anywhere in your application, you have access to that configuration object. So by saying server.plugins.config. So if you had, database connection information or, logging information or whatever that was stored in your configuration, it would be there. You can use it also for things like organizing all your routes in the same spot. So it's just an easy way. It's not middleware. It doesn't get called in between things, but it's just something that allows you to plug something into your application more on a global scope, but it's still all within a module. And this way you know where to go look. If this were your routes table, you would go, you need to update a route, it's here. Then the request lifecycle. So your application gets a request, you're handling, it follows a deterministic set of steps, and your application can modify that request along the way by hooking into any of these extension points. And they are like on pre-request, on pre-authorization, on post-authorization, on pre-handler, on post-handler, and that handler is your callback function that handles the route, and on pre-response. So, at any point, again, for like authorization, if you've authorized and you want to attach something else to that request object, you can at any point along the chain here. If you, after your handler runs, you wanted to do something like you're always, adding a bearer token to the header or whatever, you can do that with the post handler or something like that. So, and that gets connected up here with the ext call to your server. You probably noticed that everything's like server dot. So all these things hang off of the server object, which is the core of Hapi. So here we'd say we're going to put in some function call in the on pre-response function. So before we send the response back to the client, we can do something like, this is a really contrived example, obviously. So if it's not a boom, there's not a boom attached to this, so it's not an error, we just continue. Otherwise, we can do something like, say, we're going to change the status code from a 400. If it was a 400, we're going to make it a 422. Why you would do that, I don't know. But that's just an example of something that you can do, by modifying the response in this at any point in this life cycle. How are we doing on time, Brett? 10 minutes. Okay. Well, Equalize has nothing to do with Hapi, but I was going to include a lot more of this, and I thought if I had a little time, I would talk about it a bit. So Sequelize is a node. Anybody using Sequelize or another ORM for Node? I think there's one called I can't remember. There's a couple out there, but Sequelize is pretty cool. And if you've used Active Record and Rails, it's kind of similar to that. That's what I was looking for when I was looking for a node-based one. And I don't have any slides on that, but I do have. Probably can't see this, but. Thanks, babe. She's great, yeah. So what? Can't really see that. This is a database, or I have this website that does school uniform resale, and I wrote it back like forever ago. Back when a lot of you weren't even writing code at that point. It's an old, ugly PHP. So it's kind of like my pet project. I always go rewrite stuff for that with a new tool that I'm learning. So what I'm doing here, this is a Hapi application, but I can define these models here, and I'll open one up. School model. And you define your model, and you give it all the your fields, and these are going to map to MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, SQLite. So it's a pretty cool library that wraps those. And so then in your Hapi, like here's one. like this is a get route to get all the schools basically. So you can call school.findAll and give it the attributes or the columns out of the table that you want to pull, and then just reply with that JSON object, which we've seen you can do already. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty fast. So if I did that right, node index. So if I can hit that in the browser now and tools. So it's actually waiting for localhost. Come on, don't make a liar. Oh, crap. Well, I'm not going to go into it because I don't have environment variables set here apparently that I need. I do over in this one. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. That's pretty much it. We'll call it at that point. Sequelize is really cool if you have, if you want to do node-based active record type stuff, which is really, really nice. It's really pretty performant. They've got a great Slack channel and that sort of thing. That's another thing about Hapi. There's a great IRC channel and a great all right, so anyway, except for my wife, we're all happy now. That's about it for me. You can follow me on Twitter and tell me how you love Hapi now, because you do, right? It's way better than anything else out there. Right, Chris? And by the way, I don't think it requires the left pad. Maybe, I'm not sure. So it won't break everything if you install it. Maybe it will, I don't know. I think they got that straightened out. So that's it. Thanks.
Check, mic check.
You said that when you were pulling the this is a sequelized question. When you were pulling data out of the database, it was porting it to a JSON JSON string and then passing it back to the.
Well, what I'm doing there, it is the find all is going to return me a big JSON block of the data representation, and so then when I just call reply with that JSON, this would be suitable like if you were doing an API, that was just returning JSON. Okay. I could also do a view there if I wanted to format it like it.
So you mentioned earlier that Hapi does a lot of wrapping around things like what Node would do. Before you got Hapi, would you approach something like this with just straight Node, or would you have used something completely different?
I mean,
what should I be doing Hapi in that I'm doing differently now?
Well, I'm not really here to tell you that you should replace whatever you're doing with Hapi. I think it's very cool. I think it simplifies things. The other thing was like Express is probably the most popular web framework for Node. But things like you don't have to have a body parser. You don't have to parse query parameters. You don't have to. It handles a lot of those incoming things that you just expect. To be there for you. Like if you've done it with just raw Node, you have to, inspect that incoming request. Same thing with the reply. You have to do, format things and tell it the return type and all that sort of stuff.
So you're saying Hapi is like a drop-in solution for if you're having to go and bring in things like Express and then something to connect to your SQL database. You could use Sequelize instead of that, and it deals with a lot of these problems in sort of one package and consistent way rather than having to combine several pieces from hither and yonder.
Basically, yeah. And to me, it's just a little simpler to understand. It's a more intuitive way they've named things and organized things. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's better than Express. Express is fantastic, and there's a lot of people out there using it. But To me, it's kind of like as Sinatra is to Rails or Flask is to Django, maybe Hapi is kind of to Express. Kind of, sort of.
Anybody else? All right, give it up for Andrew. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.